You're listening to Binjang 91.5, and it's time for Tech Talk with Mathew Dickerson. I'm your guest, Tony Grant. Good morning, Matthew.
Yeah, good morning, Tony. Good to chat to you again, as always.
Absolutely. Now, the first topic is Apple has announced their new iPhone SE, dubbed the SE2 by everyone, except Apple. So what's that?
Well, I think Apple has this funny idea that they don't like to give versions to some of their products. So, for example, the iPad, we all call iPad second generation, third generation, fourth generation, that type of thing. But iPad, or Apple just calls the iPad the iPad. And so they've done the same with the SE. The old SE, which kind of stood for special edition, but I'm not sure if that was official from Apple or just what general pundits talked about, was a remake of the old Apple iPhone 5. And they basically just upgraded the internals of the 5 and gave people a cheaper version of their phone. And they've done the same with the SE2. They've taken the old iPhone 8 and they've essentially taken the components from parts of the 11 and put it into the iPhone 8 case and called it the SE, or as we call it, the SE2. So it's the same size as the iPhone 8. It's got the home button, so it doesn't use Face ID to unlock the phone. It's got an updated processor, so it's got the A13 processor, the same as the iPhone 11. They put dual SIM capabilities on there, but then left essentially everything else the same. And I must admit, Tony, I'm a little bit surprised they've actually launched this phone at the moment in the middle of COVID-19. It has been delayed by a couple of weeks, and that's understandable with what's going on around the world. But even now, it's probably not the best time to launch any new product across the world. But iPhone sales have been suffering a little bit in the market because Apple has been, or is in the middle of their cycle, their normal cycle. September's their normal time frame to bring out a new phone. Samsung was just after their latest release of their S20. So Samsung was in the box position, had lots of product available, and so they're actually stealing a bit of market share away from Apple at the moment. So Apple probably felt they had to respond, even though it's not the ideal time to respond.
That's interesting. Now, Matthew, here's one that's very contentious. The Australian Federal Police officers have trialled a controversial facial recognition tool from Clearview AI. So tell us about that.
And what's particularly controversial about this one is that they denied having anything to do with it. And there were 7 officers within the Australian Federal Police who are actually using Clearview AI. Now, Clearview AI has been started by an Australian, and he got this idea of actually scraping lots of data off the internet. So whether it be off Facebook or social media sites or anything that he could find that identified someone's face with their name, and basically compile this database of billions of faces and obviously the associated names. And then he's been basically trying to sell that around the world to different organisations, mainly government organisations, as you can understand, to be able to use that information and be able to recognise faces through various CCTV or photographs that people might have or organisations might have. And in this particular scenario, the AFP were trialling it. They were actually using it. They weren't paying for it, but again, there were 7 officers who were using it. And when they were asked about it, the AFP said, no, we don't know anything about this software. We're not doing it at all. And then it came out this year that, in fact, they were using it. And so a little bit of controversy around that. But I suppose the bigger picture here is the amount of information that a private organisation, which is what Clearview is, the amount of information they can gather and then start to use for basically tracking and keeping an eye on what people are doing, which, again, with COVID-19 and tracking people has a whole range of implications.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is people are concerned about the government getting, a very minimalist approach to tracking in this new software tracking for COVID-19.
Yeah, you're spot on.
In fact, a lot of this sort of information has been gathered, by outside companies all over the world. In the corporate space. They track where people are. They check if there's a service station nearby they could go and buy something from or whatever.
Yeah.
So we already have this to a very large extent, and it's spread over lots of different countries.
Exactly right. And I suppose that the interesting issue there is people are worried sometimes about a government organisation having access to that. In some aspect, I'd probably prefer a government organisation rather than some private organisations having that information.
Well, that's right. And with this COVID-19 app, it's designed so it's not really geolocating anybody. All it's doing is detecting if people have got close to each other for 15 minutes or up to 15 minutes or more within 1.5 metres, so that if someone does get caught, they can actually see who someone's been in contact with, their telephone numbers and basic information will come up so that they can go after those people the easy way, rather than having to sort of interview people and track them down by hauling them in and interviewing them and trying to find out who they're seen and relying on their memory and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, so you're talking about the Australian government potential coronavirus tracing app, and you're spot on. One of the crucial things about that app is that what the government is telling us is that it doesn't track where you are. So it may know that Tony Graham and Mathew Dickerson were in close proximity with each other because we exchanged Bluetooth data between our phones, but it doesn't actually know where we were when we were close. It just knows in the last 14 days. Or what we were doing, exactly right.
Yeah, all it's doing is providing a contact number. So, and you'd want the government to be able to do that, wouldn't you, for your own sake?
Yeah, you're right. And I think one of the problems I see with this particular app is that the Australian government and other governments around the world are trying to reinvent the wheel. So Singapore's already done it. They only got about 20% of people, or less than 20%, that signed up to the app. In the UK, they're trying to do it. Obviously, in Australia, we're trying to do it. But Apple and Google are also getting together, and they're basically working on something that would be across all borders and allow that information to be spread around that way. And to some extent, I probably think that if you're going to have two giants of the tech world, and those two typically sit in the top 4 of largest companies in the world, if you're going to have those two giants do it across the world, maybe work in collaboration with them rather than try and reinvent the wheel. And I'm not sure where the Australian government is in that collaboration.
Yes, well, the only problem with those corporations, of course, is they already have a vast amount of information, and some people say too much, in fact.
Yeah.
And I think real privacy concerns really come up with those companies.
Yeah,
anyway,
spot on.
Now, the ACCC is taking up the fight for farmers for their right to repair their own tractors. Now, this is a topic that we've been following for some time.
Yeah.
So where's that got to now, Matthew?
Yeah, well, the ACCC has actually jumped into it now, which I think is fantastic. Now, we do know the humble old tractor, and I remember when I was a kid helping out friends on the farm and driving a tractor. They weren't very sophisticated pieces of technology. They were noisy. They were pretty dirty in terms of the environment. Now, they are probably among the most sophisticated machines on the planet. And you've got some issues where a software malfunction might mean that a piece of equipment that they can be worth up to, say, $800,000, it might sit idle in a paddock waiting for an authorised repairer to come and fix the problem. And farms have been fighting for their right to actually be able to repair that. Now, whether that means repair it themselves or getting someone else who's not the authorised repairer to actually repair it. Now, the manufacturers have said, sorry, unless it's one of our authorised repairers, you void your total warranty if you touch that. And again, that's where the ACCC's got involved, because they've been saying, if you're bringing this equipment into our country, you need to conform to the rules of our country, and there needs to be that right to repair. So yes, the ACCC's involved, but this is a worldwide movement, and it's not just related to tractors, but tractors may well be what breaks the camel's back as such. So people talk about the right to repair, whether it be phones, whether it be cars with some of the software on a modern car, whether it be tractors. And so this fight will continue on, but once the ACCC's weighed in, and there will be similar organisations at a government level around the world that will weigh in, I think some of those manufacturers, and you're talking about pretty large manufacturers here, the likes of, say, John Deere in tractors, then some of those manufacturers might be forced into allowing other people to work on their particular equipment.
Now, Matthew, Facebook and Google are facing mandatory code of conduct to form a level playing field with traditional news media outlets. And this has been a very controversial subject.
Yeah.
I would have thought actually copyright laws would have come in to protect news media to some extent, but that hasn't happened, has it?
It hasn't happened, and the federal government at one stage was actually talking about a voluntary code of conduct, and there's no surprises here from my perspective. If you say to an organisation, you've got to voluntarily pay or you've got to voluntarily adhere to a certain...
You can be able to hear the sound.
Sorry?
Yeah, sorry, Matthew.
That's right. If you say to someone you've got to voluntarily adhere to a code of conduct, then some organisations say, There's a cost involved for me for that, so I'm not going to worry about doing it. But the federal government has now asked the competition watchdog, the ACCC again, to come in and develop a mandatory code of conduct, because what's happening is that you've got the social media sites delivering news and obviously not paying for that news, and you've got news outlets or traditional media outlets trying to generate legitimate news, paying journalists, qualified journalists to develop that news, make sure it's unbiased, but they're not getting the advertising revenue. So essentially, companies like Facebook and Google are taking advantage of those news outlets, getting the good content, but not having to actually pay for it. So this code of conduct is in development at the moment. We're waiting for some further information to come through in July, where there'll be a working paper developed, I would imagine. And again, I think what we'll see here is some sort of levelling of the playing field, but the problem is that it's almost an expectation now for people, particularly younger people who have grown up with social media and the social media outlets themselves, to have no cost for all of that information, but that can't go on forever. So I think development of this code of conduct, I think, is a sensible, logical way to go forward.
Yeah. And you'll be listening to Tech Talk on Binjang 91.5 with Mathew Dickerson. Stay tuned this afternoon and we'll have another session. In the meantime, it's over to the news.